We have, in addition to myself as Finance Committee Chairman, we have Councilman Ben Reynolds and Councilman William Carroll, who are both serving on the Finance Committee. And we also have Councilwoman Jeannie Gregory and Councilman Corey Penn here. Oh, and Councilman Scott Jones. Last but not least. This is a working session for the City Council, so it's an opportunity for the Council to understand the budget. We will not be taking any public comment or questions. Those members of the public wishing to make a comment on the budget may do so in several ways. One way is to sign up and speak at the public hearing on the budget, which will be next week at the City Council meeting. And the public can also email us or call or write or any number of different ways to contact the council persons if they have any comments to make with respect to the budget. We will be receiving presentations from the administration. We will first receive a presentation with respect to the general fund, and I would ask the council members present to, if you have a question about a specific item which arises on the general fund, which arises during the course of that presentation, or that you've brought with you, please hold those questions. Please hold those questions until after the presentation is completed, so we can move through the presentation, then we'll take questions. After we complete the work on the general fund, we'll follow the same process with respect to the capital fund. One thing I would also ask of the city council members is, let's keep the questions to kind of high-level questions with respect to the budget. If you want to, this is really not the meeting to get way down deep in the weeds. If you've got really deep in the weeds questions, I would suggest you make a separate appointment with Mr. Holt and his staff, and we'll be happy to meet with you at your convenience in order to go through it line by line, numeral by numeral, if that's the thing you want to do. So I'd ask you today just to keep yourself to items of general interest at a fairly high level. So in order to begin, I'm going to go ahead and ask Mr. Holt to make any opening comments he might make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Daves. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting us here to speak today about the budget. The budget today will be presented by myself and Celia Sapp. She's the Deputy Director of Finance and also is charged with the overall budget process on an annual basis. For us, this is the biggest event of the year. I mean, the world is, I'm sorry, Rebecca. It's pretty close to being the biggest, if not. It's pretty much the roadmap for the city going forward. And a lot of time goes into this. We start this process back in April and worked with all the departments over the last 4 months until we produce the document and then prepare it and send it to you guys. We have representatives, I think, from most of all the other different departments as well to enlighten us if we have any questions that Celia and I are not able to answer. And they'll be happy to help you as well. And I guess I would just say, we look forward to all of your input, and thanks for your involvement, because I think this is really the city's budget. This is not Bob's budget or city's budget. And we're looking forward to moving forward with this process over the next couple of weeks and coming up with a complete budget that the city can move forward with next year. So with that, I think I'll just go ahead. I did say the city is going to do general and I'll do the capital. And with that, I'll turn it over to City.
Good afternoon. The budget is comprised of the general fund, the capital improvements fund, the convention center fund, and then selected data, which is comes from our internal service and enterprise funds. The next slide is the summary budget, which you have in your budget packet. We have revenues and transfers in this year of $304 million. We have not used any carryover to balance the budget. So that's the second year in a row we've been able to manage that. Expenditures and transfers out total $298 million. Next. The general fund budget process is important, especially for the new members of the council, because our budgets are built from the ground up, and I want y'all to keep that in mind. We do this so that all levels of management can have input into the budget. The first level we call the department level, and that is where the cost center managers turn in their budgets based on what they perceive there needs to be. At level one, if it would come back in and we had revenues in excess or equal to expenses, we'd stop here, but that never happens. And so then we go to level two, where the executive directors make cuts that they feel can be made, because we have to get to a balanced budget. At level three, finance gets it, and if it's still not balanced, we have to make cuts. And we're very careful when we do this, because we do not want to interfere with the cost centers, so that, you know, we want them to succeed, but we have to balance the budget. Level four is where the mayor makes adjustments as needed, and level five is the adopted budget, which will become the final version. So that's the process for the general fund. The changes between the 22 budget and the 23 budget include, in the office of the mayor, the Office of Professional Responsibility was created and is included in the 23 budget. It's a new cost center. External and Community Affairs changed its name to Community Affairs / Council Liaison. In last year's budget, it was its own department, and it was entitled External and Community Affairs. In the current budget, it is a cost center under the mayor. Finance merged Treasury into accounting. Administrative services. Animal Services was created in October as its own cost center. Years ago, it had been its own cost center. Then it was, assimilated into the police support services. And now we pulled it back out because there's a lot of attention to animal services. So, so that was the change. That's the only change for administrative services. And in public works, special events changed its name to events. Right away and land disturbance merged into engineering, and electrical merged into traffic engineering. Now, I want to point out that when these changes are made, they are suggested by the cost center managers because of efficiency, basically. The new performance contracts in this year's budget include USS Alabama for $125,000, the Bridge Builder Classic for $100,000, and the Port City Classic for $225,000. The United Methodist Intercity Mission has been funded in the recreation budgets, and so it was pulled out and put into, listed as a performance contract, because that's what it is, and that way we're trying to get all the performance contract in one area. So that's why they happen, but they're not really new. Okay, for the general fund budget highlights, revenues are projected using monthly actuals between May 21 and April 22, you know, with any adjustments for known differences. And those adjustments are like, we made the 1% in capital be what the new calculation was, because every year that will change. When sales taxes go up, the 1% will go up, and we'll have to give, and we give more to capital. So that's just an example. This budget includes a 2.5% merit raise for city employees. It also includes the 2.5% COLA that was given last spring that was not budgeted. So it was not budgeted in 22, but because of excess revenues, it was given in the spring, but we had to fund it in 23. So there's not two raises in this budget for next year. There's a raise that happened already, and then 2.5 that will happen during FY '23. There is no increase to the employees for the healthcare costs. Fuel was increased almost $3 million because it was not funded adequately this year. We are, we're gonna be okay this year, but we wanted to make sure we'd be okay next year, so we went ahead and increased that. The canopy contracts are in this budget are $1.5 million. The mowing contracts, which include the ditches and the herbicide contracts, total just over $2 million. And the personnel involved in our mowing crews are right at $1.9 million. We put in a subsidy to the cruise terminal this year for $591,000 because the cruise ship's not gonna be here next year, and they have some surplus that will carry them, but we calculated, we estimated they're gonna need an additional $591,000 to make it through next year before the ship comes back. The next slide is our revenues and transfers by categories, and you can see that sales taxes are the majority of our revenues at 65.9%. The detail of the revenues can be found at page 2 of the budget, if you want to look at page 2 of the budget. Permits and licenses are 14.1%. Property tax is 6.2%. Transfers in are things like the 5-cent gas tax and the fuel inspection fees. And the graph on the right side of the page is just another version of that, a stacked graph with the amounts included. On the next page, we show expenditures and transfers out by category. Public safety is our biggest department at 36.7%. Public works is 22.3%. Administrative services 4.4%. Other departments include the city clerk's office, city council, finance, and other cost centers can be found on page 13 of the budget and include things like the jail, the personnel board, EMA, the library, things like that. They're listed on page 13, and transfers out are listed on page 13 as well. And that they are mostly our subsidies for tennis, EMS, and grants, things like that. They're listed out on page 13. And the graph on the right side is just a stacked version that shows the amounts. The next slide is what we project our fund balance to be if we don't pay out any additional amounts. So we anticipate, based on the numbers we have today, that our fund balance at September 30th will be approximately 122 million. In the 23 budget, as it's presented to you, there is a $6 million 2% reserve included, which would be our net income if revenues came in as exactly we project and expenses went out as exactly we project, we would have a $6 million income, so we would end the year with $128 million surplus. CJ, who is not here today, asked for this at the last finance meeting, so I thought we would put it in. And this just shows the motor pool funding by cost center. So all of the departments, all of the cost centers listed have automobiles, and the total contribution is what they're going to transfer to motor pool, and we call it a motor pool budget rate. And the amount is split between overhead for motor pool, because motor pool is self-funded, and then the difference is the acquisition that goes into their motor pool project. And, you know, in theory, if for a vehicle, we have a 5-year life on a vehicle, they would annually put in, the amount, and after 5 years, be able to replace the vehicle. That's the way it works basically, but that's the funding. So, so acquisitions for, 23 total, a little over $13 million. That will go into that acquisition pot. So, that's the end of, that's into the general fund, for this little amount for motor pool. Do you have any questions?
What we'll do is we'll start with the committee members, and then we'll move to the other council persons
Okay.
with questions, so we'll start with Mr. Crowley.
So, yeah, and this year's proposed budget is showing revenue for the general fund at $181 million.
Revenue,
Showing proposed revenue for this year, 23, $181 million.
okay.
It's showing the actual revenue, in 22, or adopted in 22 of $167 million, which is roughly a $14 million increase from 22 to 23 in proposed revenue.
Can you tell me where you have your number?
That's, in the budget that you guys presented to us. It's on the first page of revenue, the first line item under sales tax.
Oh, sale, you're talking about
Right,
sales.
talk about sales tax revenue.
Sales tax, I was
Right.
looking at the summary page.
In that sales tax revenue line, is that where the 1 penny sales tax shows?
No, the 1 penny actually, we split sales tax, so the 181 is gonna go in the PJ is 11.
That's
But
right.
that's gonna go into the general fund. If you look at page 17,
Okay, but on page 17 too, so we're showing,
but
In-
the
in next year's
47
fiscal-
million is the 1 cent
Yeah.
that goes to capital.
but in next year's proposed budget, we're showing a $14 million increase in sales tax revenue to the general fund, based on what we
But it's
adopted.
based on actuals.
Right.
Yeah, because we are doing better in the current year than we budgeted.
Right, but from 22 to 23, we're showing a $14 million increase, right?
From budget to budget.
From budget to budget, which
Yeah.
means that we're receiving more money in this coming year proposed than we did in the last fiscal year, correct? Under capital, which I don't think we can ask that question yet because we wanted to separate the two. But at this current time, just in the general fund, we are looking at what's proposed to be a $14 million increase beyond this year's receivable.
But between the budget, but it's based on this year's actuals, so really, we're level funding. We're level funding.
Well, this is kind of deceptive then, because.
Well, but this is
I mean,
it's
you
adopted
have-
budget to proposed budget.
Right, but
Yeah,
this is kind of deceiving because from what I'm hearing, the adopted budget right now, we've had a great year and we've had, so much excess revenue, over expenditures, which is in the neighborhood of, what, $40 to $60 million in savings this year alone, when you take into consideration the penny sales tax along with the actual budget. So there is a projected savings also in the next year's budget too, based on what I'm looking right
What page are you
here.
looking
Yes.
at?
he's
Yeah,
looking
I'm
at
looking at
two.
all the numbers.
But, okay,
Looking at all of them.
revenues are based on actuals, from May to April.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't wanna say anything incorrect.
The 47 is a calculation that we do based on the prior year's audited numbers, so because we don't have a complete year for 22 yet, the number that we get for the 1 cent for fiscal 22 will be the budget for 24. There's a lag.
Right, but we're showing an increase in each subsequent year from what I've seen right here. So there's an.
Because it keeps going up.
That's right, because,
Yeah.
so there's an opportunity for reallocation for monies above level funding that are actually there, even though you're level funded.
If you go above level funding, then you're actually assuming that revenues will continue to increase.
Right, but
Well,
if we,
well,
if
this budget is based on the theory that next year will be as good as this year, but not better. And we have, you know, there are indications in the economy that it might not be as good, but, we have long discussions about this, but we can control expenses if revenues don't come in as expected. We're good at controlling expenses. Revenues are gonna be what they're gonna be. And, you know, this is a level funded based on actual numbers. Budget. Do you understand what I'm saying?
oh, yeah, I do.
The capital sales tax number went up
We're
to
not
by
even-
5 million. The capital number, it went up by 5 million.
Yes, I know all that. So, but even in our general fund, the capital can't go up, our capital can't go up unless our general fund revenues are also gonna actually go up, even though you're projecting. So you're answering my question by saying that there is an increase, a projected increase in receivable revenue through sales tax for 23 that we're possibly looking at. So my question is where did y'all reallocate that perceived increase? But we hadn't talked about capital yet, so I can wait and look at that, even though I've already looked at your capital budget.
Okay.
But there's an opportunity here, you know,
Well,
all
and
citizens.
expenses increase.
Yes, but every year, with every increase, those increases have gone to the administration and areas that the administration wanted to see grow within city government. I'm looking for an opportunity to spend money on people and have people feel the power of this 1 cent sales tax and other revenues in the city. And I'm looking for an opportunity to do things within the city and the community where we're not always pushing money into city departments. I appreciate all the raises, the COLAs, and all of that other stuff. I think that's great, but I also think that we need to create an opportunity within the budget to where people actually feel the spending power of the city of Mobile. I can wait for the rest.
I think it would be helpful if we set up questions and not statements.
So wasn't a statement, the questions were answered.
Follow my statement. Do you have any more questions, Mr. Chairman?
Got quite a few, probably gonna take a week, but I can wait.
Perhaps you could arrange for a meeting one-on-one with Mr. Holt.
I think a lot of the questions need to be public knowledge and not hidden behind a private meeting, and I think the general public needs to hear those.
Excuse me, but I don't think we
Insight
hide
for
behind
full
any
transparency.
information. I don't think we hide behind any
Any
information.
more questions, Mr. Carroll? Any
I
more?
said not right now.
Okay.
Okay, but let me just say, I think we want to be totally transparent with every question. I've invited every councilman to come visit with us, talk about the budget. I've written every answer, we've written answers to every question they've had. We've sent answers to people from outside of city government regarding the budget. We have nothing to hide, and I just want to leave it at that. There's no point in saying anything like that, because that's not the case.
I haven't had the time yet to talk to you. I answered your email when you asked me to meet with you the very next day after receiving the budget. The administration has had 6 months or better to work on the budget. I'm a council member. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have an accountant. I don't have people to break down the budget like you do. So it takes some time for a council member to go through this.
I don't think
Second-
that's-
Secondly,
That's it,
secondly,
gentlemen,
we
gentlemen,
have-
that's it, that's it. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Office of Professional Responsibility, this is a new category. What is the personnel count for OPR?
Rob?
I can get it, I have got that.
You know how many? We have
It's actually comprised of police department, 1 fireman,
It's five,
1 at large.
it's five full-time positions,
You're talking about budgeted positions.
budgeted
Okay.
positions.
Yeah. All right, and let's see. All right, and then along the lines of our discussion this morning and the engineering operating budget, I'm sorry, I didn't write down this number when we had met previously. What was, their budget obviously increased as a result of the combining of right-of-way land disturbance into their budget. But also, what was the Osprey initiative total budgeted amount for engineering? The exact total budget?
It's 500.
500 only, okay. All right. And then. I guess those are only, oh, no, I did have, on performance contracts. The History Museum Board increase of approximately $435,000. Were we told what that is for the History Museum? What is that for?
Some of it has to do with, salary adjustments. They were still paying people, I think, $9 an hour. They were unable to fill those positions even though we corrected city employees. They stand as a separate entity for the city. The other also has to do with having to staff and run the Heritage House in Africatown, and then, expanding the use of Fort Condy.
Okay, and then you said the city staff associated with the History Museum Board. How many city staff are associated with the history?
They're not city employees.
Okay, there are none, zero.
That's correct.
Okay.
But the problem was is that they were still paying a rate at $9 an hour for their entry in, and they were unable to fill their positions.
Okay. And the other performance contracts that are on here, of course, some of these have been reported on the news. Looks like we funded the HBCU Gulf Coast Classic last year, $250,000, and going up to $350,000. Why is that? Is there a
It's the cost of actually getting the games here. That's gone up with Deion Sanders and some other things that have happened within the HBCU. But that wasn't an increase in the overall funding. If you notice that we took Lending Tree down 100, moved that money over to $350,000 to help fund the HBCU game.
Yeah, I like that. And then, but with the, I don't remember what the funding source was when we set aside the money for the Port City Classic, the Bridge Builder Classic, and the $50,000 for Mobile Sports Authority. But it looks like the goal, I mean, is to just continue to fund that, even though that funding source is no longer available to us?
I'm not sure which one you're talking about, but on the new HB, those are new items, the new performance contracts you're referring
Yeah.
to. So the Bridge Builder Classic was actually, a local, where the local high school teams go out to the Mitchell Center and play golf, right? That was funded through ARP out of the county last year. They came back because it was a success, at least locally, and asked for some assistance again. We don't have ARP money to give them, and the county, and talking to the county, is that we would fund half of it and the county would fund half of it. The same is true for the other HBCU game that you see there, is the Alabama State home game, which is $450,000 ask, and again, that was a negotiated thing between the city and the county to pay half of that price and have the county pay the other half. That one does have a big economic interest draw to the city of Mobile.
Okay, and then the United Methodist Intercity Mission of Mobile, what is this money going, $123,500, what is this for? What services?
They actually run that particular facility, the retailer facility. It was being paid for out of Parks and Rec. All we did was just move it to a performance contract, because that's what it is. It was just to clean it up.
They run RV Taylor?
The
Taylor Park.
Taylor.
So
Taylor
Taylor
Park.
Park and the pool
I got you.
is managing the facility.
I know. And then, Azalea City Golf Course, one that we talked about before. It looks like they're getting another they're getting $621,590 transferred from the general fund to their operations, which is an increase of $140,000 from last year. And it doesn't look like their revenue changes at all. So the discussion, I know I brought it up before, is here we are going to pay additional money for the golf course operations, yet we're not going to ask for any additional raise. I've been provided with a sheet that lays out some of their revenues compared to other golf courses. And, you know, I think it's time that we raise the rates as a city to offset this, at least offset this additional increase, which would be, you know, $4 to $5 around. So, and if we're gonna do that, we need a budget for it, so.
What the green fees? $25? Huh?
That's with car. I know, it's a good deal. But on this sheet though, and I know this is getting down into the minutia a little bit, but on this sheet, it lists Magnolia Grove at $50. And that's not true. It's not $50 to play golf at Magnolia Grove. You get to pay $50 at Magnolia Grove if you buy what's called a trail card at Magnolia Grove, which is an additional 100 or 150, I don't know what it is, card. Then you're now get a discounted rate when you go out there and play. So their actual full freight rate's around $85. So if a $5 increase brings it to, say, total cost of $48, it's not gonna cause a whole lot of heartburn.
I agree, this is in the weeds.
Yep. If I can't do it, you can't do it, you know what I mean?
All right, so, I'd like to see us budget for a revenue increase there. So a modification to the budget to account for that. We're talking about pros. And that's all I have at this point. Question?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Going back to the performance contracts, just some questions about how they are done. I mean, most of them are flat, and we see the budget that we fund these year after year, but there are some new ones. So are we doing performance contracts in the same way, or are these organizations coming in and filling out documents every year, you know, detailed documents about how they're gonna use the money, their tax information, all that sort of thing?
They submit financial reports to us throughout the year, but to your point, as we've been talking about revamping the entire process so that we have a little more control of how that money is used through the performance contract going forward. But for the most part, performance contracts, and I think y'all know this, once you give them, it's just a recurring expense. If you ever try to, a lot of them started off as seed money, but it never really ends up one.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the days that we had committee meetings where we had each organization come in and plead their case before we would decide whether to give them any funding or not. So we've moved a long way from that, but I was just curious if things were done, you know, the same way. And then with these new organizations that are coming on, what's the thinking when you add to the list? And, you know, why are we adding these and, you know, maybe not others?
So, let me go back to the HBCU Alabama Home State. That's the biggest performance contract, new performance contract that we have. That one, because of the economic impact to the area by bringing a lot of people in to watch that game, and I think Carol probably knows more than I do about it, but maybe 40,000 visitors or people attending that game.
The first game will be Jackson State Grambling. It'll probably have a draw of 30,000 people. With Grambling being the furthest traveler, which will create, if the game's played, like hopefully we're suggesting at 6 o'clock at night, will create room nights and entertainment and restaurants, and it'll be an economic impact to the stadium. Our biggest projection though is the Gulf Coast Challenge, which is gonna probably, from what I'm hearing already, the projected stadium is sold out, and the game's playing, I'm thinking about a month or so, plays in November. So plus they're looking at a 41,000 person ticket sale plus a 70,000 person impact to the city of Mobile on the weekend. I don't know if we're ready to even handle that game this weekend. Security's gonna change, police are gonna change, but the economic impact to the city is gonna be tremendous. the culture in the HBCU world has really changed when it comes to football now, and with an average game attendance, even in the smaller HBCUs of 26,000 people, 16 to 26,000 people is just tremendous. So I think it'd be good for the city if, when the promoter does this the correct way. But I think our biggest gains will be in the subsequent 3 years, after the Grambling game, with the next team that we play with Grambling. And I can't even know if I'm even allowed to say what that second projection is right now because it's so far away, but it's a big economic impact to the city.
Yeah, I get that, that's, the microphone up close and look how loud you are. No, I get that, because that's sort of an economic incentive sort of a thing, so I certainly get those. I'm just thinking, organizations that come to us every year for money in their budget that doesn't necessarily have an economic impact like that. We could almost put those in a separate category with those that provide a, revenue generator sort of a thing, but
Yes, ma'am.
it looks like, those are the only new ones, plus the USS Alabama, so that's a new one, but they too are a.
That
revenue
USS Alabama
generator.
though is a 4-year performance contract at $125,000 a year. That's really us participating in replacing the teak decks of the battleship. In exchange for that, though, is that we use the battleship part for many of the events that Parks and Rec does. And so there's a partnership going on there. And so we agreed to help restore the battleship.
Okay, so that's a 4-year.
Yeah, the original ask was $1 million to help replace the teak. And I think we ended up with over 4 years to help them phase that in at $125,000 a year. So that one does have a sunset to that contract. We'd like to see all of our future contracts with a sunset when it's not a recurring, but rather an expense that they unexpectedly incurred.
Yeah. The last thing, with the lawsuit that's going on with the firefighters over Parity, is there money built into the budget in case?
No, there's not. The lawsuit is to take the money away from the police. It's not to give it to the firemen. It's declaratory judgment, injunctive relief, take the money, the incentive, declare it illegal, and stop it. They lost the restraining order, but that's what you're dealing with. It's not an ask for money, it's to stop the police incentive.
I didn't read it that way.
I didn't understand it that way. I thought it was not to stop the police
Not
from
to
getting
stop
it
it.
to.
Oh, by tying an incentive to the parity clause as part of a pay plan, if that is successful, that actually puts in jeopardy all the incentives that the city provides to various job opportunities. We don't think it is part of the parity plan. We define parity as the same range, same number of steps.
We didn't compare it to the lawsuit. That's not what we're here to talk about.
No, I just thought that.
Hold on a minute, Mr. Carroll.
I just thought that there might be a need within the fire department's budget to provide that same sort of incentive for them, and depending on how the lawsuit went, but we don't need to get into that.
They had it, it was done.
Any more questions?
Fire department.
Okay, Mr. Ben, we'll come back to you.
I just wanted to ask a question about the performance contracts while we were on it.
No, we'll come back to you, Mr. Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you kind of, probably thought you kind of helped me see it in the budget. I see that it was an increase, in the mayor from about $2 million. What was that increase?
OPR is what the
That's
main
what-
increase.
So that's $2 million OPR?
It's 1 million.
Okay, and what's
And
the
then
other
if you
1
look
million?
at the other, cost centers that are in
Communications.
the mayor, they're going up by like $100,000, and that's the other.
Okay.
Have we baked in the other, Anita's level?
Yeah, Nitra's, well, but the whole thing moved up, so that's comparable.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, of course, we know that, and you kind of explained why public safety, the service, public works, there was some combined,
Yeah, I wanted to go over those changes with you so you'd understand.
Okay.
Kind of what, if you're looking at the 22 budget from last year, there are some changes because of what we went over.
and that's and you put a page that to show what those departments, how much they receive last year?
Well, when departments merge, we merge the history of them as well. So it's only if you look at last year's budget, this year it's comparable, because we've moved it up to where it needs to be. And I can go over that with you
Okay.
after this, if you want me to.
Yeah, I like that. I think we talked about when we got our individual meeting about performance contracting.
Right, and we are working on getting you that history. 10 years ago, the performance contracts were listed in various places, included, there were several that were embedded in cost centers, and so they're very hard to track. But, you know, that's why having them all on one page is really more informative, but that's not the way it was done 10 years ago. We had them in the strategic plan, which we don't even have a budget for the strategic plan now. We had them in Capitol, we had them in the convention center, we had them in Parks and Rec, we had them in the police department, and then we had them in a page called performance contracts. So they're just harder to track, you know, 9 and 10 years ago.
Our finance system that we used 10 years ago is different than the one we use now. The one we use now, we actually scan all of the supporting documents for transactions, so we can actually pull them up, look and see what it was. Back then, sometimes you're just relying on what the description was typed in to the old system, so we can't pull up the contracts and look at them. So sometimes it's hard to dig through and figure out what was a performance contract, what wasn't. It was buried in the budget.
We're working through it, and we'll get you some information.
Okay, thank you. And then the next component, you talked about making sure that anyone that receive a performance contract, that the money stays in the city of Mobile. Have we heard any, is it?
You wanna address that?
Yeah, well, we did have some discussion about that, and actually, as I mentioned, I thought that was a good question. And we have to confirm this, but I would say that we have some organizations that we give money to that are organizations that span beyond the city of Mobile, maybe in different counties, maybe throughout the state, maybe even the United States. Maybe the Easter Seals is an example. In those particular cases, I can't say with 100% certainty that they internally are not required to take some money and send it up to their corporate office. That may or may not be, I don't know. The bulk of the performance contracts, however, are here in Mobile, and I believe that the money is here. Now, to your point, how do we know for sure? The only way to know for sure is to ask them, and I think maybe going forward, that's something that we should probably do, because I think that's what the money is really intended for, as you suggested.
Yes, and even though, of course, like you said, of course, you know, let's go to that level, but I think also in that contract stating that this money is supposed to be utilized in the city of Mobile, I think that also would help a lot, because I think it would be unfair if you had these different organizations taking taxpayers' money and sending it to other places, and the city is not benefited from.
Yeah. I think that's a fair point, yeah. So I'll talk to Ricardo about that, and we'll see what we can do about the contracts this coming year.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions, Mr. Mayor?
That's it.
Okay, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question's already been asked, but I'm a little bit confused now with the OPR. I was understanding it was like one person. I'm seeing this, it's $1 million, and then like 5 people jumped up. What is the OPR and what's their scope and purpose?
We have the OPR director here, if you want to talk.
Yeah, sure.
For the, and he'll give you a recap of what they've done since January. I think everybody just looks at it as purely like an OIG type situation, and it's not. They do handle internal complaints against city employees. It also handles external complaints against city employees, as well as claims against the city as well. So it's that, along with our third-party administrators. But I'm gonna let Director Rob Lasky kind of explain what they do in that unit.
Good afternoon. First of all, I will correct something. Although we do have 5 OPR employees, 2 of them were already working for the city and were just transferred. Dan Davis and from risk management and health and safety person. They were already a merit board, their employees are working for the city, they just were put underneath me. So we actually only created 3 new positions at OPR. Basically, OPR is, you conduct all the internal investigations for the city, to include the police department. The internal affairs unit sits within our office. Aside from that, we have 1 investigator from the fire department, and we use Dan Davis as an investigator, and we have 1 unfilled position for an additional investigator that will start next fiscal year. To date, I believe I'll get to my notes. We've conducted 33 police internal investigations, and 47 non-police investigations, 23 of which have been for the fire department. We also look at and manage the claims process for the city. In that respect, we've looked at, since January 1, 110 claims, we've closed 77, and we have 33 open. I think, and if you look at the way we've handled claims, I think Mr. Woods can attest that we are down to, I believe it's 7 basic and about 12 kind of more than basic active lawsuits against the city, which is the lowest, well, I was told as low as it's been in the last, during this administration. So we're effectively handling the claims, redressing the complaints of the citizens, and kind of giving the most bang for the buck in a very cost-efficient manner.
Okay, thank you. Communications, we've gone from 98,000 in 2020 to 446,000 in 23, and an increase of 100,000 this year. What is that paying for?
Candace, do you want to address it?
I can address from 2022 to 2023. And
Candace,
that,
we use the mic so that.
Sure. Oh, sorry, Sylvia. I can address from 2022 to 2023. So the primary cost increase is due to an in-house graphic designer, which I think I've talked with all of you guys about. There's also some just general increases in costs. The Textile Web software is on IT, actually. Just parking increases and some other software increases. I can give you an itemized list of what's increased, but that's primarily it is graphic designer and just increase.
Thank you. That's good. Chief Prime, in the police cyber, we've gone from 1.2 million to 3.6 this year, then 1.3, 1.9, almost a 500,000 increase. I know we've used a lot of ARPA funds in that direction as well. What's the driver for that increase?
Consolidation, it's not new positions, it's consolidation of the intelligence unit, the gun and crimes intelligence, and all under one umbrella, under the cyber.
Does that include the ShotSpotter technology also?
They're the ones handling the ShotSpotter technology, right? And so we combine Curtis Graves group, the tactical intelligence group, and the gun intelligence, all under one umbrella. So it's not new money or new positions, it's just a restructuring. And it is to handle our shot detection, which is going really well.
Yeah, there also wasn't budgeted that last year, that's why you see the increase. Last year's expenditure came from ARPA funding.
That's right, and we're still using some ARPA funding, but it's still being paid through our, through our ledger, yeah.
On page 8, do we know on the grant management, and I know we talk about this a lot, but have we ever gotten figures on dollar figures of grants we've brought in this past fiscal year?
Yes, but I will, what I gave him today was just the ones from the Land Rebuild America, but I'll get that for you.
Okay. For IT, we've got an increase in operating costs of $600,000 almost. What is that going? Is that just software increases across the board, or what are we what are we paying for in that 600,000?
I'll get you a detail of that, I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's probably gonna be software cost.
Traffic engineering, we've reduced that overall budget by about 550K from last year to this year. And this is one I would have expected an increase with everything that we're doing. Is Jennifer here by chance?
Nick is here, and Nick is Jennifer's supervisor.
Yeah, but she's the,
It has to do with the electricians.
It was a transfer. So the electricians transferred over into real estate asset management, so it was a transfer of people.
That's correct. About half of the electrical department worked on traffic signal related stuff, and half of them worked on building related stuff. So basically the department's effectively split so that the traffic engineering and the electricians that work with them stayed in the traffic engineering world, and then the electricians that work on the building moved over to the building world, just to speed up efficiency.
so this is one of those areas that we have significant challenges with day in and day out in the city. Does this budget give us what we need to effectively get after the traffic problems in the city?
Look, it does. Look, I think. Yes, I believe it does within the sum total of the variables that we have.
Do we have enough traffic engineers, real traffic engineers, because I think how many do we have in the city?
I tell you, probably our newest employee to the city of Mobile was an engineer that we hired, which literally started Monday in traffic engineering.
Is it a traffic engineer?
He's a traffic engineer.
So how many do we have now?
We have 3 dedicated engineers,
Traffic engineers.
traffic engineers.
Okay. Thank you. At the bottom of that page, we've got forestry, and then we've got fleet management. Is that forestry fleet management, or are those just forestry vehicles there? Is operating costs?
What page are you on?
Page 10.
No, that's separate. It's forestry is a separate, and then fleet is a separate.
And fleet is a cost center.
That's a cost center.
Under
underneath
public services.
That's
Gotcha,
forestry.
okay. So, I'm looking at the canopy contracts being over 1.5 million.
Right.
When I hear canopy contracts, that's just to trim the trees back. So what are we doing with the stump grinding issues in the city? How are we addressing that? Is Peter here?
No, it'll be Mark.
No, Peter's not here, and Keena might have a little more history, but what I've talked to Peter about
Use
is,
the mic, please.
but what I've learned so far, in a couple weeks, is what I've learned with Peter is that, again, overwhelming amount of work orders come in for city trees with that small department. We have some that, with the canopies that's contracted out. He also has contractors that are working on call, night and weekend emergency issues. And really, we have he has a prioritized list that emergency, life-threatening, or essential city service degradation gets worked first, and those are on the list. And then once those are done for the day, he moves on to all the rest of the routine calls. So I would say, to answer your specific question, if it's stump grinding, that would be in the prioritized list of non-emergency work orders.
And we never get those done. I would like to know from Peter what he needs for stump grinding contract for this budget specifically.
Okay.
All right.
I'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you. On the Parks and Rec, I noticed that our operational budget for recreation administration went down 300,000. Is that gonna hamstring us in any way?
No.
Okay.
Why did it go down?
It's part of cuts. And then there's our electricity. So one of the biggest things we do is trying to anticipate costs as we bring on new facilities and new lights. So we over budget last year trying to accommodate and realized that we didn't need it. So when we made the cuts, that cut came from there to help balance it at the same time.
So we're not gonna see a lack in what you guys do, because you guys are really showing out now.
No, you won't. Actually, there was an increase, so we went down in that area, but there was an increase in events to make sure that we were able to still maintain what we've been doing.
I couldn't get in the weeds, so I couldn't ask that question earlier. Told to stay out of the weeds.
The last thing goes back to the cruise terminal subsidy of $591K. I know we had discussions a while back, Joe, you were talking about, trying to get another ship in to cover that 6-month vacated period that we have. Have we hit any?
Next year, it's the whole year.
Next year's a whole year?
Explain.
I was under the impression that this was
Am I
6
not
months.
correct? That the ship will not be here?
It's coming back in.
It's not, but
It's-
it will leave in October and it will come back in October.
That's right, one whole year.
So we
That's
have
what I'm
a year vacancy from October to
Right.
October.
Right.
Okay, so,
And then it starts at 6-month rotation.
right, so, and that's to my question, there was some discussion about trying to fill that year vacancy, which would get after the $691,000 deficit that we have here. Where are we at with that?
I think there's actually a meeting that's gonna occur next month, I believe.
And what does that $691,000 pay for?
Operations,
Of,
the personnel, the recurring costs of the terminal itself.
Right.
if no ships there, how many,
You
what do
still
we?
have employees, like.
You still have maintenance on that building, you still have people.
How many people?
I can get you
Just-
that. I'll get you the whole, yeah.
So, all right. I'd be interested to have y'all follow up when we get more information on that ship that's coming. All right, that's all I've got.
And come back, Mr. Carroll.
One of the questions has already been asked, and answered in performance contracts, but however, when I went back a year, there are some performance contracts that aren't on the list anymore. One is I haven't been remembering, but the ground builder, $60,000 performance contract that wasn't reinstated, was there a reason why? We did not reinstate that one, and there were a couple requests for some new ones.
We didn't drop any. Do you know where that one was located in the previous budget?
Well, no, but you already explained the first question I had is that I always remember the budget having these performance contracts in every other place.
Well, right, but
That's one
recently
of the
they
reasons
tried
why I
to.
asked this morning for a breakdown of the entire budget so I can see where other things were. But you told me that some performance contracts on everywhere else again. I
They're
think-
trying to list them all on that one page.
Yeah, that ground building group was the group that came down to the council, filled with minority kids, where they did the water infusions, the water tanks, all that stuff. I think when I look back at previous years, I saw a $60,000 performance contract for it. A new performance contract that I was hoping that we would fill was, the old Center for the Living Arts. I forget what their number is now, but I thought that we would at least, show some type of increase or fill that one there, but I haven't had a chance to get in the weeds to see what we're actually doing.
The Center for the Living Arts is now called the Alabama Contemporary
Right.
Arts Center, and we give them $100,000.
Yeah, it was level, but I was looking to see, I was hoping that we could put an increase there based on what I saw their financial, requests and needs were. They wasn't asking for very much. I think we sat through a whole, 2.5-hour presentation down there to see, what their growth and needs were, but we're through the budget process, so we'll have to see what can be done in later time. But those were my two questions, the biggest of which is I wanted to see the entire budget so I could see where other performance contracts and things were, because the way we used to
But you
budget.
see, you're not gonna be able to see them.
Yeah.
Because like when, the inner-city mission was embedded in Parks and Rec, you
Right.
couldn't see inner-city mission.
Right, but we could ask for that breakdown, and you could tell me inner city mission is here. So what you're telling me is that every performance contract that we have is on that list that I've read already,
That's where we're trying to put them, yes, sir.
and there are no others.
The one
That
you
I
were just
know about.
talking about might be in environmental engineering, and we're gonna check that.
Okay,
Okay.
just.
But we have been cleaning it up, like you said, some of it was actually in capital, when I first took over chief of staff, so they started moving it all over to the performance contracts to list them, so everybody can see.
It would
I'll
really
show
be
you what we
helpful
see.
for me, so that I don't have to sit here and ask 100,000 questions, so I can go through it and actually see what's where and who's doing what. Because in the past, we knew what the performance contracts were, but we never really had them in one actual place. And I'm used to seeing things in a different place, and if there's others out there, I like to be able to go through the budget and see what each line item that we're spending, because there's some line items that are fully loaded, but I don't know what the tasks are or the expenditures below that fully loaded line item.
Okay?
Anything else, Mr. Chair?
No, that was it. They've answered.
I got one.
Mr. Reynolds?
What would be the heartburn to the city to move $500K from engineering for the Osprey Initiative contract to the Public Works Department?
It would be no heartburn except for engineering.
Well, I guess that's where the question needs to be, is if it just seems like it's there isn't really much of an engineering function of it, and I read through the MS4 and saw what, and then I read through the Osprey contract, and it seems like there's an ability to maybe pull that from the engineering department's management. and put it in public
Engineering
works.
is part of Public Works, and the staff in Public Works that oversees other litter operations, that's just not their bailiwick, if you will. And that's, the engineering department is the department.
We talking about Rosemary.
Yeah, the engineering department has an environmental section, which is
Understood.
Rosemary. Very limited capital projects that they oversee, that just happens to be one of them. It's kind of a very unique project. It actually started with the engineering department designing that litter track that's out there. And it kind of grew with Osprey, taking on and doing smaller litter traps throughout. The vast majority of their information comes back and is part of the MS4 contract. So it just makes sense that it's managed there.
Okay, and I'll just, this is really getting back to the discussion we had this morning with the capacity issue that exists in the engineering department. If there is an opportunity to remove some of that, say, burden from the engineering department and put it over into another department that is equipped or can be equipped or to manage it. For example, the the resiliency department, they have the ability and they deal with litter and all that stuff as well. And it would just seem like they could provide the information to engineering so that they can include it in the MS4. So the question is moving this $500K from engineering to resiliency or public works, or whatever department to relieve some of that stress that's at the engineering department currently.
That staff that manages that.
Wait, gentlemen, we're getting into.
We're talking about budget
No,
amendments.
we're getting into an issue having to do with the structure of the administration. We're here to talk about the budget.
And I'm talking about moving $500,000 from one line item to the other. That's a budget amendment. Okay.
Let me, if I may, just 30 seconds. So prior to Mr. Reynolds getting here, we had this really terse interaction with Aiden. And part of fixing that relationship and going from being the redhead stepchild to being, the shining A student was working through the process with engineering. So Rosemary, who is the person who handles that MS4 process and deals with ADEM, she is an engineer. And it takes that level of skill set to go through working with ADEM, getting that permit, because we have so much water and so much rain. That's the interaction. But I think it's important to mention that we went from having a consent decree and almost going to litigation to voluntarily.
These discussions can happen outside of this committee meeting. Anybody else have any questions about the general fund budget?
Back on the performance contracts, how many new applications, or did you get any new applications this year, other than the ones we know about? Were there others that you had to turn down?
may have flipped to Bob, some of them go straight to finance, and, but there were others that were not previously funded and we did not.
You know about how many?
Very few, there were very few requests that came in.
Yeah, I was looking at that list today, and, just to see, and really, I think we talked about them, it's the Port City Classic, the Village
No,
Classic.
she's talking about that they did not.
No, I know that we did, and I'm
Hey,
just
Bob, can you
repeating
come
them
to the
again.
microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because I can't hear what these two
I
guys
said,
talking.
I have to pick this up because I'm too tired of talking to you. That question you just raised, I was looking at that very thing today, and frankly, other than the ones we've already talked about, I really didn't see any changes over the last year about new performance contracts. And that's something that's, I guess, somewhat of a sensitive issue to the finance department as we work on the budget, because, you know, it's just one more expense, and so we have to find a place for it. But, I mean, performance contracts are a big part of the city, and will probably always be so, and I think a lot of them, or most of them, if not all of them, provide a lot of benefit to the city, and that's good, as long as we're getting something in return for it. But I really don't see any movements, Gina.
Very few new requests. So
Yeah,
very few
yeah,
new.
yeah. Actually, you know, like we were talking about earlier, we're seeing more discretionary because I think the funds are becoming a little more available than performance contracts. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Any more questions on the general fund?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jones?
Where are the new vehicle purchases specifically for fire and police rolled up at? Where are those costs captured?
If you look at that motor pool sheet in the presentation, that's where they're funded. That's an annual funding now.
So where's, when I look in the general
It's
fund budget.
motor pool.
It's not in line item.
The motor pool, I'll tell you the page number.
Yeah, page 13 on the presentation.
It's page 16 in the budget.
Is that the operating expense, part of the operating expense?
It's part of the motor pool.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the cost factors that you have down there, and I'm assuming that's operating expense. Or is that capital asset?
It's capital
addition? Capital
asset.
asset addition, okay.
And we have some agencies that are not city departments.
Right, no, that makes sense. And what's driving that is, I know when we went through the motor pool piece, y'all were in the process of going through an audit.
It's still ongoing,
When is that going to be complete?
probably by the end of September.
So, not before we really get through this budget process?
That is correct. But if it gets, as soon as it gets finished, we'll let you know.
Because, you know, you mentioned something that I think is very important. When we look at the vehicle life cycles and having an understanding of how many vehicles we have total as per what the audit will show us, and then where we are, and I guess a sand chart would be great of showing us what these life cycles are, which would then drive the replacement cost out year over year. I'm assuming that there's some, based on previous conversations with Dave and others, that there's some years that we bought a lot more vehicles, but this is important,
But not for this meeting, not for
This
this
is
meeting.
specific budget
We're
issue.
here to talk about the budget.
This is a budget issue.
Okay, can you wrap it up, please?
No, this is the most important thing we do.
To you.
To the city.
Okay, Mr. Jones, please wrap your comments up.
What I'm getting at is to make sure that we have the process and capability to show that we are on target with the vehicles that we need to get year over year without getting into an emergency budget situation 2, 3, or 4 years down the road, where we're gonna have a very high cost expenditure because we bought a lot of vehicles that year. I don't see anything right now currently that we have that would help us with that. And I think we started that process with the audit.
Yeah, we're doing the audit. Shonda Smith is actually reworking the process, and perhaps when we're done, we can have a presentation for y'all on this.
Because I just wanna make sure that what we have budgeted is gonna meet the need that we have, because public safety is one of the biggest things we have. All these vehicles get right into fire and police, and do we have the motor pool vehicles that we need? And it's a pretty important issue, I think.
For what it's worth, more is funded this year than was funded last year, than was funded the year before.
But
So
that,
at least we're
just
going in
the
the right
money,
direction.
just the money doesn't tell me anything.
I know.
There's no,
Moving on, moving on. Mr. Carroll has to step out.
No, I'll sit out and stay if you needed me to, so let's keep it rolling.
Any more questions about the general fund budget?
Yeah, that sounds like a lot, but not. for
Yeah,
this
there are
meeting.
quite a few questions, quite a few.
Would just ask us.
Do we, look, in the old days, y'all used to ask us to submit a booklet in writing. Is that what y'all are asking for again?
You can send it in writing, you can call us, we'll get you whatever you need if we have the
I
answer.
see Jim shaking his head, no.
Well,
Me?
Yeah,
No, you can submit it in writing, you can set up an appointment, or you can call them, it's a quick answer, we're fine with all that.
Let me just make a comment in general on the budget as a whole. The Zombie Act, as y'all know, requires that we approve the budget by September 20th. So we have a schedule in place, where today we're having the finance committee meeting on the budget. Next week, we will have a public hearing on the budget. I think we all like to complete our work by September 20th. We're currently scheduled to adopt the budget at our meeting on September 13th. I think if anybody has any amendments, they would. And remember, I'm not sure the new members know this, but we cannot add an expenditure without taking it from somewhere else. And we cannot increase the amount of revenues. So if you have a budget amendment, if you're thinking about a budget amendment, if you have a budget amendment after we have the public hearing, then the time to start working on your budget amendment is now. So that if you have one, if you intend to propose one, we can hear that on the 13th. All amendments should be in position to be presented at our meeting on the 13th of September, so we can consider them, either approve them or not, and move ahead and vote on the budget. Now, getting to where,
I'll say something.
in a minute. The only person who has unlimited time is the chairman.
Without objection.
Now, this is going to require work on the part of the council, and it's going to require work on the part of the administration. So if you have additional questions, please get them to the administration as quickly as possible. And I urge the administration to respond to those questions as quickly as possible, so we can all be in a position to approve the budget on September 13th. Mr. Arledge.
I just wanted to mention that, just to remind y'all, you can't increase total expenditures, without a notice of a hearing, a 3 days notice of hearing published in the newspaper, so for your scheduling, what, if that's even, an issue.
I don't understand that.
total expenditure?
Total expenditures, like, so they, 300 or whatever they said, to go above that requires that.
So if you want to move around money inside the budget, in other words, if you want to increase funding on one line item, when you bring your amendment to us, you're gonna have to tell us where it's coming from. I want to increase this $50,000, and I want to take it $50,000 from over here. Okay, we'll move the capital budget now.
All right. Okay, all right. The capital budget, do you have a time frame that you'd like to?
As soon as possible.
Take your time.
Whatever time you need.
Take your time.
Okay, let's turn to page 14, and that's probably where we'll spend a good bit of time to get started.
What's page 14 of the budget?
Of the presentation, well, except for on I think everybody got one of these anyway, but if you didn't, it's up there. So the capital budget this year does reflect an increase over last year. And it's primarily coming from the sales tax. You can see that last year our budget was $42 million. This year our proposed budget is $47 million, an increase of just about $5 million. And then throughout the rest of the revenue sources, there are a multitude of different fundings, but probably the one to make note of in general is the one at the end, which is $7 million, which is a transfer that we made from the convention center, which is typical of what we do when building this capital budget. So the total for the capital budget is $63,775 compared to $57,848, an increase of about 5.9. So going on further down, and this is probably a topic that everybody hates to see, but loves to talk about, is the debt service and transfers out. And you can see our debt service and transfers out is pretty significant. And I'll just bring that up because it is significant, and not only is it significant, it's going to be around for another 8 years. And it's something that we have to consider going forward, both in good times and bad times, because regardless of which way the economy goes and which way the budget goes, that debt service obligation will always be there, and it's really non-negotiable unless you get in trouble, and we don't want to do that. So that really leaves us about $39 million left for spending in the capital budget. So if you go over to the right side of that page, I think everybody's familiar with the CIP, Capital Improvement Fund, that each district receives $3 million. That hasn't changed. And then on top of that, we have another $4 million available that can be used for a multitude of different capital projects that the city works on identifying each year. The most important thing I wanted to talk about, though, because I think that's generally consistent every year and has been for the last several, is the next one down, exhibit number, well, the other capital expenses, and you'll see that's $3.4 million, which is up about 2.7 from last year. And if you have your budget there, you can see that there are a multitude of different reasons for that.
It's on page 18 of your budget.
Page 18 of the budget, if you have the budget with you, but I can just walk through these with you.
Page 18 of budget, so.
Yeah. So anyway, you have that first sizable increase this year, and about $3.4 million. And if you look at the budget, you can see where all that money's going. Really, there are a lot of small items in there, but you'll notice that there's $430,000 for citywide drainage repairs, which was not in there last year. We also have $300,000 for engineering, road testing, and then probably the other big one is cathodic protection for the cruise terminal, and that's something that's a requirement in order to keep the cruise terminal from from sinking into the river. Yeah. So anyway, so that's where the bulk of that money is going. You can see all the different line items there.
What's sinking into the river?
Well, I didn't say.
Where?
It's not sinking. We want to make sure that it doesn't sink. The cathodic protection for the cruise terminal. Okay, I know. You have it. Okay, and then going on down further, we have a couple of other items on there. We have public safety. So if you're still in your budget and you turn to page 19, you'll see where all the public safety money is going. The budget for that segment is the same, pretty much the same as it was last year. But I did want to point out a couple of larger items. We have $590,000 earmarked for parks. And we have almost $1.5 million for equipment and public works, and then a number of different items on down the line for $3.35 million compared to about 3.4. The one thing I haven't talked about yet, and I'm going to talk about it right now, is economic incentive. I think Gina, everybody pretty much knows that historically we have put about $2.5 million a year into the budget for economic incentive, mainly to support investment into the city by different organizations, primarily private companies that want to come and build here. We want to get Topgolf as an example of that. This year, the amount is $4.75 million, which is a big, yeah, I was gonna say, it's a big increase, and that's why I'm bringing it up. We typically put 2.5 in because we never know for sure exactly what we might get during the course of the year. This year, it's still before the fiscal year starts, so there's time for more to come in, but we do know that Topgolf's coming in, and that's why we put in 1.25 for the Topgolf. And then you'll say, well, where's the other million or so? And we have 500,000 that goes to the Chamber of Commerce, that's right underneath it. But we also put in an additional $1 million this year because we know that there potentially is another big investment into the city coming our way, and that will probably require some additional capital, and that's what we're trying to get prepared for over the next year. So we can have more discussion about that as we go forward, but that's pretty much where the economic incentive money is going. Okay, and then finally, going down the budget, the other big line item is $1.7 million for Tyler and Munis each year. Okay, so let's see. Go to the next page. The next page pretty much is a recap of what I just went through. But if you have any questions on that, we can talk about it. Overall tax revenue we talked about is up $5 million.
Yes, it is.
Pardon me? Oh, sorry. And then we did transfer $1.457 million this year to the capital budget out of the general fund to support primarily the Topgolf increase.
Well,
No, I did.
Wait, have you finished your presentation?
Not yet.
You have?
No.
Proceed with your presentation.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. Bottom of Topgolf is 1.25. If I said 1.4, then I misspoke. Okay, you went to the next page, page 20. This is just a picture of the way the capital budget is broken down. I just pretty much went through many of those different items. The two biggest components of it are the debt service, which is the largest, and the district CIP, 21 million. And then the rest of these are the items that I spoke to previously. Okay, so that's pretty much the breakdown of the capital budget, and we can talk about that. But maybe before we do, we can do the last slide now, Mr. Graves, which is the convention center. And the convention center historically has been tax money, sales tax money that has gone to the convention center, about $10 million each year. And you can see how it's spent. We transfer about $7 million to the capital budget. We spend about $1.3 million on the convention center. And then about $3.2 million goes to the Visit Mobile organization. That's based on an ordinance that was created 2 years ago, based on revenue that visitors bring into the city. And it goes to that organization. So all in all, the convention center fund is about $12 million. So any questions right now?
Mr. Carroll? I'm gonna wait till later. Need to build consensus.
Okay.
Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the exhibit to other capital expenses, this is Chrome's, but
Which page are you looking at?
18.
Okay.
In the actual budget.
IT training, how is that a capital expenditure?
Oh, the citywide environmental? Is that what you're talking about?
IT-training. Consulting, one-time.
We'll find out. We'll
Yeah, let us
ask
review
IT.
We'll do that.
It may need to be in the operational budget, not the capital budget.
Okay.
Mr. Days, I would appreciate that. And then the citywide drainage repairs, how are those allocated? Do we know? Are there any particular projects that are allocated to?
No,
Nick, you wanna say something about that?
no, they're not. That's been a historically a budget that's come to engineering. It's always gone to obviously to the districts, primarily to deal with pop-ups, major pop-ups that maybe not be able to deal, maybe that the CIP budget can't deal with. You go back to the budget years ago, there was not a CIP budget, there was only that miscellaneous drainage budget to which engineering managed and took care of all the things. So most of the time it's going to supplement one of your projects, unless something pops up that just has to be dealt with immediately, and there's not adequate CIP monies to deal with.
But repairs, in my understanding, generally fall under operational, repairs and maintenance.
These are generally things that would turn into a capital budget, something larger than what Public Works could potentially take on just from a maintenance standpoint.
Okay, so, citywide drainage repairs or drainage repairs, maintenance, is that in the operational budget as well? Or is that always handled out of the capital budget? So,
It's in the general fund,
Yeah.
additional.
Say it again?
It's in the general fund, it'll be additional to what's in the capital.
Okay.
Rhea does have criteria for what she'll put in the capital fund and what goes into the general fund. She's got procedures, I know she's put them out on our document library, I'm sure we can get you copies of those too.
Maybe help. I think that's it, that's all the questions I have.
Ms. Gregory? Mr. Pitt?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's look at the economic incentive. So in 2022, we had 2.5 million.
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
I'm on page 17. And we increased it to basically 4.8 million.
Page 17, what line?
We
Economic
That's
incentives.
Oh, economic incentive, oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, now, this year, I know recently we, of course, approved the top golf, that's 1.2 million. All right, so we expecting, I'm just using an example. Top golf, 1.2. We just increased it to 4.7. We're expecting 4 large properties of entertainment like Top Golf to come in the city of Mobile.
No.
Maybe not like Top Golf, but sometimes we get projects that can come in and be expecting a much more than the 2.5. The 2.5 has been a general target that we've used year over year. It typically covers our expenses for each year. Some of these economic incentive programs require not just incentives for the short term, but some of them require payments that go out maybe as much as 10 years. So we're trying to cover that as well, because we don't know what's going to be coming in the future.
And I know being mentioned in the city drainage repairs, are we gonna look, or y'all, is this like just money sitting there just in case, or are we projecting certain areas?
I hope it's not just in case.
I'm talking like, it's not we haven't selected.
No, the money is available for drainage.
Yeah, and every year it's been spent.
Oh, I know it's gonna be spent.
Every year it's been spent, and that's just a nominal amount, because we know it's gonna rain, we know there's gonna be hurricanes, we know there's gonna be things.
Yeah, I know it's gonna be spent, but do we know where it's gonna be spent? Okay, all right. And parking lot resurface, city facilities, do we know where that money allocated is gonna be spent?
I can take that.
Go ahead.
So in the budget process, there was several departments that submitted requests for parking lots for the facilities. I believe that the total dollar amount that was put in there and the plan going forward with whatever that dollar amount ends up being is multiple departments. Of course, the engineering department will lead it, but the police department, fire department, parks, we'll look at all the various parking lots that exist within the city and then make those determinations of which one. I know the museum out by Langdon Lake, they had asked for the parking lot to be resurfaced. I know a few other ones with some of the park facilities, so the list is not finalized yet, but we want to look at it holistically across the city and see where the money's best spent. And that's a place where hypothetically that miscellaneous drainage can go to. Sometimes we go in and we look at those facilities and there's a drainage issue that's associated with it. That's how we would fund that additional repair.
I guess the reason why I'm asking the question is because, District 1, we have a lot of, drainage issues, infrastructure issues. And when I add a lot of this money up, it equals almost close to about $7 million extra, and it's 7 districts. Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Just a couple of questions. On the public works side for capital improvement, how close are we gonna be to expending budget that we had allocated for this fiscal year?
You want to answer that? I think, I will say this, speaking, wait, go ahead.
Are you talking about for the total CIP?
No, the entire budget.
Are you talking about for the total capital?
Capital improvements.
For capital improvement?
Yeah.
So that's hard to say, because some of them are in design now, and so then it's construction. So we're usually, by the time it get approved, for like 2023, we'll just be starting the process of getting it through. So we're usually a year behind in getting those projects done. So for example, for the funds that we have for 2022, that we're doing, they're going in design now. They're moving forward. So the construction is gonna happen in year 2023.
So if we spend all the money that we had allocated in 2022 is the question.
No, not all.
Well, one thing.
Some
that
of it
might-
was still in.
One thing that might help is the capital does not close at the end of the year.
That's right.
It lives on.
It carries
The
over.
general fund is annual, but the capital is not.
I get that, but we have a budget, right? And it's a target for us to expend that money. And I guess what I'm getting after is, have we expended the money? Because this budget is $5 million more than last year. If we haven't expended last year's capital budget, what's our level of confidence that we're gonna be able to expend the allocations that we have in this budget? Is it a process issue? Is it just a people issue? I mean,
Take for instance, today, the council approved $10 million, 10 million of the 21 million, today. It took us, many months to get that project through a design stage. We can't start spending money until the budget is approved, and then projects, even the design projects, it takes a couple of months to get through the approval process. And so the money won't physically be spent, but that's why you've seen us primarily with the resurfacing and the sidewalks adjust to a multi-year, an every other year cycle. Just before I came in here, I looked at the draft for the sidewalks. I think we've got almost $3 million worth of sidewalk work budgeted in the capital budget. It'll take the better part of 18 months to spend all that, to physically spend it in the world. I think that, maybe Bob can elaborate on this, that's why that capital budget for the capital items stay out there over a period of 3 years. And that's just the nature of the.
we're talking obligated versus expended. Okay, so have we obligated the FY '22 funds that we had budgeted?
Yes.
I think the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Before you run on.
Mr. Carroll?
Thank you. I don't even know how to ask you this anymore. And I was gonna ask this later, but I need to see actual 19, actual 20 and actual 21. All I see is adopted 22. And if I can get actual 20 and 21, I can kind of see what we've done in 22, 23. That's capital budget. Yeah, I'm looking for the growth factor, to see what it was. Also, to your response about capital, which I was gonna ask later, I know what I have left in capital from previous years because I've asked that question. I know what I'm gonna do with that that $1,189,000 as of November 1st. I know where that money's gonna go because it's left over on capital projects. But to the person that just asked that question, they're asking the same question that I did, but they like to know what is remaining on all capital projects over the past 3 years that is unspent. Because the curiosity is what's really out there. We're looking at a budget year, but we don't know what's in previous budget years that could be spent per district. That's what they're asking.
We could provide that again,
All right.
because Jasmine,
Right.
for the CIP.
Because, that's what they're asking. And that'll resolve some of these questions. The economic incentive of 2.2, I can't remember what it was, $2,225,000 increase. There has to be a solid reason for that. I don't know, we've already expended the 1.25 for Gulf Quest, which would be in 23, but that's in this 22-year budget. Because, has to be, because we already expended it. I mean, it's been passed by council, and municipal law says that you cannot do any project without already having the money in place. So we pass an incentive, and if we can't pass an incentive on unreal money, so that money's already expended.
Say Gulf Quest?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Top
Top my mind was way back in 2010 for a second. But, so that money's already been expended. So the 2.25 million, what is your projected incentives on that? Or is that just in hopes of a project? Now, I know what may happen at the end of Michigan Avenue. I know what may happen across the street. I know what may happen out on Airport. But some of those don't add up to $2.25 million.
We'll
So,
give you a schedule.
thank you. I like to see those.
Any further questions on the capital or convention center budgets? Okay, Mr. Arledge, would you please state again what the rule is on increasing overall expenditure?
This is under 1144C49. The total expenditures as recommended by the mayor cannot be increased without a public hearing on such increase, which shall be held not less than 3 days after notice thereof by publication in the newspaper general circulation.
So, you've heard that, so absent that procedure, we are limited in spending to what has been submitted to us by the mayor. Again, if anybody wants to move anything around in the budget, I urge them to go ahead and start working on their budget amendments. If you're gonna move it from one place, you gotta say, if you're gonna add one place, you gotta identify where it's coming from. Anything else?
And just a closing remark?
Yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, I really appreciate everybody's involvement in this thing. I know that there are a lot of topics in here that are sensitive to many and really sensitive to everybody out here too. And I want you to feel as if anybody who has questions about anything about the budget, feel free to give me a call or City a call, and we will make as much time as necessary to go over the issues with you. The other thing I want to say too is that this was not an easy budget to come up with. And I say that because going into this coming year, we're coming into this year in a different world than we did last year. And we had a lot of debate about just, how aggressive we wanted to be in this budget, how generous we wanted to be in this budget, what should we put in it, what should we not put in it. And I still think we came up with the best solution. But I want to go on record saying that, we have a different environment in 2023 coming up than we did in 2022. And we all need to be aware of that. And so if you detect some some conservatism on my part, is because it's kind of the finance way, you know, that's what I'll be sensitive to. But, I think, you know, if we execute our budget the right way, and if we execute some of the things that you all feel strongly about, then we will have a successful year. And I think we will be a year that will still be able to look at the general fund and say, okay, we didn't do what we did the last 2 years, but maybe we're still in a position where we feel like we manage the business well, and we manage the city well, and we're contributing to people that needed the money, that maybe haven't been getting it. So that's what I wanted to say. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. And I would urge everybody again to, any questions you have, to go ahead and get them to Mr. Bolton, the staff. And I'd urge the finance department to respond to those requests as quickly as possible. And I would urge you to get Mr. Carroll the information that he, line item information, as quickly as possible, so he can put on his green eye shades and get in there and start looking at those line items.
I did say, you know, those little accountant green eye shades with the little pocket pen.
I didn't even get that done.
Not an accountant.